Yeah. When you want.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. I'm sorry, I'm far away from the place where you are discussing the results of this interesting project. But I'm glad that I had at least the chance to read the report and also to follow a bit the development of the EPOCA project. So I just prepared a couple of comments that came to my mind while reading the report. One is, of course, methodological. I think that the project adds a lot in a field in which empirical evidence is so difficult to collect. And we know that one of the reasons why it is so difficult to develop a theorization and to test hypotheses about political corruption is related with the lack of databases and the weaknesses of existing ones. So there are some instruments, about perceptions of degree of corruptions, like the Transparency International Index on Transparency. There are databases that have been constructed in different countries based on newspapers data, but each of these collection of empirical informations adds something, but is per se not sufficient. And I think that a survey on the entire population, focusing on issues of the perceptions, definitions of corruptions, investigating, as this project has done, also the ways in which different groups in the population perceive corruption, is extremely interesting in combination also with other types of data. I think that the specific value added of this type of data refers to two elements that I want to discuss in what follows. One is related with the role of the citizens within corrupt exchanges, and the other one is related with the importance of perceptions of broad corruptions in sort of producing conditions for the development of corruption itself. About the first point, what we have tried to suggest in the work I've done with the other colleagues, including Alberto Vannucci, including Luis, and including others, is that the corrupt exchange is not something that is limited to the briber and the bribees, that there are many other actors that are involved, that political corruption is in fact embedded in a field in which many and different types of actors intervene. So that usually the bribes tend to be paid by a businessman to a politicians, but around these two main actors, there are a lot of actors of different types that allow for the corrupt exchange to develop. So usually businessmen are involved in sort of cartels that negotiate with corrupt politicians. Corrupt politicians are parts of political parties that tend also, when they are deeply penetrated by political corruption, to play an important role in the organizations of the corrupt actions itself. There are also other actors that participate in what's with Alberto Vannucci we have called the governance of corruption. So in ensuring that hidden exchange are implemented. But there is also an obvious role of the citizens, especially in their functions or in their role as electors. And this is an element that your project helped investigating, and which I think is extremely important, because a puzzle that you have also mentioned during your research is that very often corrupt politicians are not punished because of their corrupt deals becoming public, but rather they, under some circumstances, appeal to electors as effective in producing some type of outcomes, especially in terms of individual exchange with the electors. And this is something that has emerged in several qualitative research that pointed at the ways in which corrupt politicians invested part of the gains that they made on the illegal markets into electoral machines that they used in order to get votes. And in fact, it is to be remembered that corrupt politicians need votes of electors. And so I think that's investigating, as you have done, the reasons why people think that corrupt politicians are sometimes successful or are often successful is important in order also to devise responses and to develop anti-corruption type of politics. And there are many responses that you got in your investigations that are in fact dovetail or resonate with the results of other empirical research. So citizens tend to vote for corrupt politicians when they think that anyhow all politicians are corrupted, or that there is more chances to be protected by a corrupt politician than by an honest one. This brings about another element, the second element that I wanted to mention. What we have noticed also in qualitative research, it seems confirmed by your data, is that corruptions itself create the conditions in a vicious cycles for the electors to sponsor corrupt politicians, in the sense that when people observe or perceive a widespread corruption, it means also they experience or perceive the lack of respect for their own rights as citizens. And this is related with several type of vicious cycles through which corruption spread. So citizens tend to vote and support corrupt politicians when they have the impressions that in order to get something they are entitled to get, they need some special protections. And of course, then corruption creates even more, fuel even more these needs, because it creates sort of favored channels of access to the institutions for those who are protected. So I think that the strict connections that we have found in qualitative research on political corruptions in several countries is also confirmed by the data at the individual level of citizens who perceive that corruption spreads because there is a lack of respect of citizenship rights. So it explains also why corruption is not related only, it's not limited to poor countries, but it's fueled and develops under conditions of social economic inequalities, and especially the perceptions that the good politics is not able to protect the citizens. So perceptions of corruptions by the populations are, I want to stress, also important, because when citizens perceive that their rights, their citizenship rights are not respected, then they are more likely to look for special protections. Another point I want to make is about the distributions of opinions about corruptions in the populations. And without going in the details of your report, which I guess you will present with a much better knowledge than mine, what I found interesting is that on the one hand, people tend to be almost unanimous in condemning corruptions, but also what I notice is a sort of immorality of the rich. And it seems that while the appreciation, the stigmatizations of corruptions broadly is widespread by gender, generation, political opinions, and so on. Nevertheless, there seems to be a sort of cynicism of the richest groups of the populations that are probably those who are more involved in a certain type of corruption. So in the systemic corruptions around the big public investments, especially in some areas. And this is particularly delicate now because the pandemic is also a conditions that will favor some types of public expenses, sometimes is favored sometimes of emergential interventions that are very prone to illegality and corruption itself. So I think that this maybe I noticed this because I'm involved at the moment in a research project investigating the sort of value system promoted by the super rich in neoliberal societies in which especially the super rich are the groups that is increasing its power. And the super rich tend to be proud of their richness. And I think through a cynical view also of the ways in which interactions between politics and the market are to be developed. And I would be glad to discuss it even more with you, but I had the impressions that this is reflected in your data. I want to use the last few minutes to address a question that was asked by the organizers in terms of how to develop further in the methodological approach. I think that your project is already an important benchmark for other countries to investigate in depth the use, the indicators and the questions that you have used in order also to build cross-national comparative data. But what I think would be also very interesting is to construct around this data also focus group with specific categories of actors who may be particularly relevant for the fight against corruptions, to sort of brokers of anti-corruptions, and to investigate together with lawyers, judges, police, but also NGOs involved in anti-corruptions, which type of meanings can be attached to this. And I think that probably a focus group or other type of qualitative interviews could be also important in order to go more in depth in the causal mechanisms that explain the type of statistical correlations that you have addressed. And I think that both from the points of view of the political values and from the point of view of classes, this would be very interesting to analyze, because the political consequences of the perceptions of the spreading of corruptions are quite relevant, both in terms of clientelistic supports for some politicians, but also in terms of populist reactions to perceived corruptions of the elite. So thank you once again for having invited me to address the results of your research, and I look forward to the continuation of your work. Thank you very much.